the screen.
Okay. I hope you can see it.
And yeah, we see the slides and
yes. But let me then make it full screen, I hope. This one, yes. So is it full screen now?
Yes, it is full screen.
And I have to hide. Oh, how do I hide that? Okay, I can see. Yes, all right. So thank you very much for the invitation. I started as a physicist, and I'm still within the Faculty of Physics, Astronomy, and Informatics, where this informatics was the group that I've started many years ago. But then, well, I thought what is of my greatest interest is artificial intelligence. That was around the 80s, a very long time ago too. And then I thought, okay, we just need to understand brain a bit better and, well, look for inspiration. What brains are doing that should help us to understand how to create machine learning systems, etc. So for a long time, I was working on machine learning, and now we have a group which is very mixed, which does experiments, analysis of all sorts. So I'll say a few words about neuroinformatics in general, and then about the relations of artificial intelligence and neuroscience, and then about simulation of neurodynamics and how we use real data and our own experiments to draw some information from EEG and fMRI, and where does that lead us. So my feeling is that in this moment of history of civilization, we are really on the threshold of a dream. Maybe this is a nightmare, not a dream, but we, well, started to understand how mental states arise from specific activity of brain networks. And so there are many global brain initiatives and many attempts for human enhancement based on these ideas. And then, well, we start to understand the relations between mind and brain, which were only recently called the biggest gap in science that we have. And to understand it better, we need to understand neurodynamics and brain networks. And we can simulate that, and we can also do real measurements. So we can look for fingerprints of real mental activity in the numerous kinds of measurements and data. And our final goal, of course, is to improve our brains, use our brains to the maximum and optimize our brain processes. And I've been thinking about that for really quite a long time. And slowly we came to this point where, well, we became the research university, we've got some money, we have created a rather very strange mix of dynamics, mathematical analysis, and artificial intelligence as the center of excellence. And the dynamics and ergodic theory is a group of mathematicians. We have also theoretical computer scientists, we have mathematical physicists who work mostly on entangled states and dynamics of open quantum systems. And we have our group, which is just neuroinformatics and AI. So neuroinformatics is a combination of basically two very important disciplines on the science front, and that is the brain research and artificial intelligence, or well, more precisely, mostly machine learning. By using these methods from machine learning, we can analyze the signals, and we can also try to understand how to create better algorithms. One institution which tries to coordinate global efforts around the world in all OECD countries is called International Neuroinformatics Coordination Facility, and it has a center in Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. 18 countries belong to this, 120 institutions, and the Polish node has been established by Professor Wójcik at Nensky Institute some years ago, and then it has moved to our group in 2017. So 2 years ago, in September 2019, we had the Congress of Neuroinformatics and the assembly of all the leaders from these different countries in Warsaw. Well, in Poland, people have tried to create something called Polish Brain Council, which was responsible for creating a brain plan for Poland, mostly on the medical side. But somehow 8 years have passed and there is no activity in this group, no money for this. And Neuroinformatics is not doing too well, I must say, because we've tried to become a full member of INCF, and the government has never found the money for such insignificant things as brains or neuroinformatics. But of course, everybody talks about the fourth industrial revolution. You know that in Rzeszów, there is a center for fourth industrial revolution in Poland. What you can find at this World Economic Forum page here is that they think about AI, robotics, but also behavioral science, human enhancement, sensors, precision medicine, and neuroscience, and lots of other things, which will be the basis of fourth industrial revolution. As you know, AI has made great progress in recent years, and people have achieved a superhuman level in many different areas. One is reasoning, of course. Already in 1997, Deep Blue has won with Kasparov playing chess. And then in 2016, AlphaGo has won in Go with Korean and then also Chinese world master. And then AlphaGo Zero actually has reached a superhuman level and has beaten the AlphaGo 100-0, basically, just playing with itself. So it appears that the whole knowledge that people have accumulated, how to play chess and how to play Go and other things like that, has been actually recreated by machines playing with themselves. So reasoning is gone. Perception, well, that was a big problem, how to recognize objects, images, faces, etc. And then the deep learning came, and people have made great progress in face recognition. And there are many tests actually showing that in these tests, machines are doing better than humans. Actually, they can recognize faces in a better way, personalities, for example, criminal tendencies, which really made a lot of discussion. That was done by Chinese group. Sexual preferences, political, religious orientation, general image recognition, etc. So perception is gone. Strategy and planning. Well, OpenAI has won in poker, and strategic games such as Dota 2 or StarCraft 2. And the military actually has shown that you can control the military activities in much better way using AI than rather than just controlling them by generals or other military personnel. Well, in science, already in 2015, AI has reverse engineered planarian regeneration regulatory networks. So planarians are very small, and if you cut them in half, they can grow back. Now, how does that happen? Well, AI has found what kind of processes, genetic and metabolic pathways are responsible for that. And as you know, last year in December, AlphaFold 2 has made a great progress in protein folding, jumping with accuracy compared to the experimental measurements from about 40% to about 80% or more than 80%. Okay, in robotics, it was hard to see, robots that could really be flexible. And suddenly we see the Atlas robot by Boston Dynamics that can do the backflip and can do some parkour and does really incredible things. And now we have also trucks and autonomous vehicles on the road, not fully autonomous yet, but it's going into this direction. Creativity and imagery, there is a program called AI Virtual Artist, or AIVA, which is a member of French Composer Association and has hundreds of compositions which they copyrighted and assigned to AIVA. And it has lots of also CDs and performances by real human orchestras of the compositions that AIVA has created. Deep Art is doing very nice things and all kinds of painting programs which are very imaginative. Well, in language is the most difficult thing, of course. In 2011, IBM Watson won the Jeopardy, or Vabank as it's called in Poland. And then IBM started this cognitive revolution somehow, or cognitive systems. And then in 2018, Watson Debater has actually been arguing with philosophers. They organized these debates where you have 15 minutes to prepare, and then you have to defend certain position, and your opponent is trying to defend another position. And it has won with 2 professional philosophers doing the debates. Well, the Google BERT, which is an incredibly complex system, has answered 100,000 squat questions. That's a test where we have also the human level, let's say, and the BERT has already beaten that, and now, well, we have even better systems than BERT. And then we have the cyborgs, that is people working on brain-computer interfaces, try to optimize human brains. And this is slowly coming, and this is where I'm going to. Okay, so for many years we've been working on. Yeah.
Can I interrupt for a moment? Because I think that there is still one weak spot in the AI. It's the telling jokes and still
humor, yes, AI humor. Well, okay. I mean, I don't have time to go into AI and things like that, but actually humor research is also very interesting. I have some notes which are for the freshmen of cognitive science, where I talk about humor, but let's keep it for today. Okay. Well, I mean, definitely it's not done yet, and that's what I'm going to say right now. We've been working on meta-learning. That is the idea that we would like to have a system which is automatic. For many years, people have been just optimizing parameters and devising architectures to solve particular problems. And about 20 years ago, I wrote with my PhD student a meta-learning search in the model space, the first article on that. Meta-learning is very popular now. Unfortunately, I moved later to this neuroinformatics stuff, and now meta-learning is quite popular, and unfortunately, I'm not really pushing this research direction, but we had several books in Springer on the challenges and meta-learning in computational intelligence on that. So once people have learned how to solve the perception problem, they understood that we need something more. And what we really need is that we want to have a system that can perceive. This is the deep learning and machine learning, basically knowledge acquisition. And it can learn. But on the other hand, we would like to form contextual models that will allow us to reason. Once we have object recognition, we want to reason with these objects, or thinking with, well, words perceptions, and deriving some kind of abstract models behind that. So perceiving is done quite well. Learning, we know how to do. Abstracting, not that well, but still quite a bit, and reasoning also quite well. And so people have devised about 5-6 years ago this generative adversarial networks, or the idea that 2 networks may play against each other. One is trying to create false examples, the other is trying to recognize whether it's false or not. And this helps to build systems and models of objects, and people hope that we're going now to make models where we will be able to follow causal kind of processes and reasoning. We don't have it yet. And unfortunately, IBM Watson doesn't do this. And unfortunately, the BERT and other inventions that we have now don't do that. And another reason why we're so much interested in the brain is, of course, the cost of brain disorders. Brain is the most complex machinery that we know in the universe so far. And because of that, it breaks fairly often. And so about 2010, when they have counted how much Europe is losing on brain disorders, it was about 800 billion euros. And now it's probably well over 1 trillion euros, actually. And lots of problems that we have, not only dementia, but costs of mood disorders, psychotic disorders, anxiety disorders, addictions, etc., are growing. Okay, so because of that, big global organizations like IEEE have created all kinds of projects. First, we had in 2013 Human Brain Project. This was the EU flagship. I actually initiated one of these flagships and we're hoping that we will get that, but unfortunately it was given to Human Brain Project, which lied quite a lot and is still going on, but it's kind of a bottom-up project. Ours was more top-down and bottom-up combination. And then also the Obama Brain Initiative, or brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies, has started. So IEEE wants to develop new technologies to explore how brains are really creating minds, so to say. This is a joint effort of about 20 IEEE societies. Okay. We had a very nice meeting 2 years ago in Japan, in Miyazaki, on that, and two presidents, the current and the coming president of IEEE, came for the meeting. So I think IEEE is taking that seriously. So one thing that should bring us a bit farther and solve, let's say, problems that require really flexible intelligence that still we are not able to solve, is looking at the brain-inspired cognitive architectures, or BICA as it's called, and there are conferences on that. There is a journal now. We started that in 2008 in Memphis. Actually, I participated in this conference. Well, as Jeff Hawkins, who is well known because he started PayPal and then started a small neuroscience AI institute and has studied neuroscience himself, in the last book, 1,000 Brains, has written, "We'll never have true AI without first understanding the brain." I'm very uneasy about the true AI. I mean, whatever people mean by true AI, I think AI is just solving problems for which we don't have effective algorithms, and that's all. And so everything that we have is a true AI in the sense if it solves problems for which we don't have effective algorithms. But okay, so I've been writing about these artificial brains and approach for quite a long time. And in '96, actually, we had a conference on computer physics. And after that, I published a long article in Computer Physics Communications. They've accepted that, but there was the editorial comment that, sometimes such strange things are coming. And I have it on my webpage because it was quite funny. But they have accepted this idea that we should work on computational physics of the mind. Lots of other things happen in the meantime, but I have no time to dwell on that. So let's talk a bit about the relation of AI and neuroscience now. We had, a year ago, we had Tommaso Poggio from MIT, who is a very well-known expert and already quite an old fellow. And he was stressing that AI will make progress only if we start to look seriously at the brain. But unfortunately, as you know, looking at anything in biology is very complex because we have processes that, when you look at the spatial scale, will happen at the scale of nanometers up to meters, and at the time scale on picoseconds up to years. And this multi-level psychiatric phenomics has been created where people say, okay, it's all depending on the molecular level. And then we have this microcircuit level, we have neurons here. And on the microcircuit level, there is neurodynamics. And then it is contributing to certain responses of the whole system. And then it's contributing to our behavior, right? So the question is how to decompose all this and how to analyze the behavior. If we stay at the neurodynamics level, we can look at the activity of large brain networks and relate that to various brain functions. But at the same time, we can look down and say, okay, the activity of the brain networks depends on the neurons, and the neurons, are composed of proteins, and proteins are coming from, translation of genetic information, etc. So we can look down and we can look up if we stay at the level of neurodynamics. This actually is similar to this idea that Marvin Minsky, one of the pioneers of the AI has written in his book in 1986 on the society of mind, when he has defined this idea of AI agents or subnetworks implementing specific functions. At least we actually look at that as subnetworks. But of course, you very well know the multi-agent systems and use that in modeling of various phenomena. Okay, so when we looked at well, people looked at the brain, they found indeed that to solve any complex problems, we need this multi-level neuropsychiatric phenomics. First, it's psychiatrists who look at that. They said, we are diagnosing various mental disorders, looking at the symptoms, but that is not enough. We need to see how large brain systems are deregulated and what to do to bring them back to kind of a well, efficient regulation. And so, well, people have found that we have many networks which are responsible for example, for evaluating how salient are different stimuli at the given moment. And it could be the internal states as well. Suddenly we just remember something, and so it's very salient, or suddenly we just hear something and that draws our attention. When it draws our attention, it looks like there are several different kinds of networks. The networks which is kind of orientation, vigilance, or intentional attention, where we just follow something. So people have found that this what psychologists have called attention, for example, or memory, or consciousness, or whatever, is actually many different processes in the brain, which are actually engaging very specific subnetworks in the brain. And so we have to decompose neurodynamics into the activity of large-scale networks and relate that to various brain functions. And nobody has done that correctly so far. We can actually recognize some of this, but we have not learned how to decompose the whole neurodynamics into the dynamics of and interplay of all these large-scale networks. And it's not even clear how many, maybe, well, the minimum is 7. The maximum is probably well over 100 in the last papers. And so people who are really pioneers in machine learning now, like Denis Hassabis and other people from Google DeepMind and, well, Oxford and University College London, etc., have been writing about neuroscience-inspired AI. It's a paper in Neuron, which is a neuroscience journal. And simple inspirations have led to creation of artificial neural networks. But then you have papers like Yoshua Bengio, who writes about consciousness prior, for example, or Amoset and other people learning awareness models, etc. So they look at these psychological constructs and they look at what brains are doing and try to derive some ideas about visual attention, the fact that we have complementary learning systems, quick learning of episodic facts or memories or episodes, and slow learning of basically semantics or semantic memory in neocortical systems. And there are interesting models of working memory. There is this Numenta, Jeff Hawkins' hierarchical temporal memory, his theory of neocortex. There are lots of machine learning techniques which people also use to analyze what happens in the brain. For example, the idea of reinforcement learning came out from observation of animal psychology, but now it's a key concept that allows us to understand what happens in the brain when people learn new skills or new behaviors. So activity of midbrain dopaminergic neurons, for example, is actually kind of a reward mechanism, and people have used something like temporal difference algorithms to understand how prediction errors are generated. Actually, this is one of the topics that we work on. So you'll see it later. Also, the convolutional neural networks allow us to understand representation in higher level visual streams, ventral as it's called, of humans and monkeys. And there are Now, precise experiments where people record the activity of neurons, single neurons, or about 200 neurons, let's say, at least hundreds of neurons, and find what these neurons are doing and interpret that in the sense of these intermediate layers of convolutional neural networks. The long short-term memory architecture that Jürgen Schmidhuber has devised provides key insights in research on working memory and lots of other things. So there is a very nice interplay between AI and neuroscience going on. And what we would like to really understand and have is to define a mapping. We have basically states of mind or mental states, something that we can recognize in our inner experience and can kind of point to, recognize temperatures, pains, colors, shapes, but also moral reactions that we have and other things like that, very soft things, and then relate that to brain states. Well, brain-computer interfaces do it in a very primitive way. They try to pick up the intentions, like the intention to go left, right, stop, move, etc., from the brain states. But that's very primitive. We would like to really understand the brain states and relate that to mind states. So stream of mental states, movement of thoughts, can be represented as a kind of trajectories in some kind of psychological spaces where we can, say the dimensions are related to something we can perceive or understand, verbalize somehow. But unfortunately, it appears that phenomenology of what happens in our mind is very difficult to describe. And philosophers such as Eric Schwitzgabel have written really very nice books, Perplexities of Consciousness. You can find it on the web, and he has a version which is free. And he writes how we really don't know what happens in our minds, which is really amazing. On the other hand, neurodynamics can be measured in many different ways, like EEG, MEG, NIRS, PET, fMRI, etc. But still, we don't have a single technique that could measure things with high temporal resolution and high spatial resolution, which is somehow critical. So we try to combine different techniques and understand what's going on. So what psychiatrists have done, they said, okay, let's just look at all these large scale systems. And there are many networks related to that. And we have cognition, for example, language, perception, control, working memory, attention, declarative memory, blah, blah, blah. And we can try to decompose this cognitive system into, well, specific functions. And for each function, we can try to look for networks and try to find out how they can get deregulated. We have also positive valence systems with reward and negative valence systems, which is related to loss, frustration, etc. We have social processes, which are related to perception of self and others. And we have general arousal and rhythms and sleep and wakefulness regulatory processes. And then they have added also sensory motor domain in 2019. This is slowly growing. It's been like maybe more than 10 years since National Institute of Mental Health has started to accumulate all this information, and they do it by looking at these networks and then looking at these lower level processes related to cells, structures, proteins, genes, etc., signaling processes, and then looking at behavior. So they want to capture everything in this multi-level phenomics. That's really something for future generations or several generations to come. So what is mental state? It's basically, well, in the brain, we have lots of noise, many things going on at the same time. So unless we have a state which is strong enough, coherent enough, that sticks well above all the noise so that the other parts of the brain may notice, okay, there is something kind of metastable, and I can actually recognize that. And once I recognize that, I have more groups of neurons are then synchronized. Various subnetworks compete, and there is this winner takes all mechanism for competition. And this leaves only the strongest states, which can be well analyzed using signal detection theory. So the question is how to extract stable intentions from such chaotic states. In general, we have lots of these local small world kind of architecture and local networks, which are responsible for all these functions. And then they interchange information, and all complex states require that these local networks communicate with each other. And when people look at the brain, they found that, well, rarely these states communicate directly with each other. They usually communicate through a central flexible hub. So we have lots of these networks, which are mentioned here. And these networks may sometimes contribute certain groups of neurons to specific tasks that we actually work on. And the central role, though, is played by frontoparietal flexible hub. And there is this theory of frontoparietal intelligence. And these black lines just show how strongly correlated are signals from different areas. And you see that some like ventral attention, which is orientation responses, are always going and relating to other networks through the flexible central hub. The exception is the default mode network, which is turning on different parts of the brain when we just think about ourselves, when we don't have any task to do. And then it tries to recruit all kinds of neurons from other parts of the brain. So there are many theories now. One is how to simplify neurodynamics, related to how to simplify the neurodynamics and how to model brain mental states.
Can I interrupt for a moment also?
Yes, please, please.
Sorry for interrupting, but can we treat this central hub as a kind of routing switch composed of many Boolean operators?
That's a good question, because this is what we have done in case of the brainstem, actually describing that as a kind of a switching mechanism. The brain state can switch this rough behavior, arousal kind of things. And then it seems that you can try to use models like that. But as you will see, it's much more complex in case of the brain, of course. I mean, it's a nice picture that it's a central hub, but it's composed of many groups of neurons which participate in other networks in specific ways. So yes, we could do it, but it will be very rough description.
I have just one more question. So yes, because I don't know how well this fine structure of the subnetworks is investigated, but yeah, currently my advisor on PhD is started a new project with trying to somehow decode function of network purely from its structure. So kind of like you just get the network and you try to guess what purpose it serves. So he just started. It's kind of huge project.
That's very, very interesting idea, of course. But one thing that Hawkins, for example, is stressing very much, and not only Hawkins, but recently we had a meeting with David Eagleman, and he also stressed that basically you have all kinds of organisms with very different sensory systems and motor systems, etc. And all this is controlled by the brain, which just has a cortex, and the cortex is very similar in all brains, in all parts of this. So there must be some kind of universal algorithm that whatever you throw on the organism, the brain is actually learning how to do it. Mm-hmm. And he has a very nice pictures. Eagleman, in his latest book, LifeWire, has a very nice pictures. For example, a dog that has been born without the front legs, and so it runs on the two legs. And all kinds of things like that animals can learn and people can learn if you just add certain even artificial well, possibilities, how to control things by reading the brain states. It just becomes a part of us. If there is a strong coupling, as we know in dynamical systems, then these systems become one. So we can kind of become one. And this idea actually comes to Heidegger's metaphysics of being, etc. But okay, I don't want to go into that.
Sorry for this digression.
Okay, so there are many proposals how to simplify these brain functions. I had this idea that we can use kind of a neurofuzzy model. That is, we just can model the probability density of different signals and relate that to certain decisions behaviors. The nice models are based on the attractor networks and transitions between attractors, which are the metastable states. And it seems like in the brain you can find kind of not really point attractors, but fuzzy point attractors. That is, you'll see that in a moment. And Robert Kozma and Walter Freeman, who died recently, unfortunately, has this also metastable states in dynamical systems, cinematic theory, as they call it. Hawkins talks about frames, grid cells, cortical columns, and sequences that his hierarchical temporal memory algorithm learns. And recently also Jeff Hinton came up with the capsule networks for image segmentation recognition, which is a very interesting idea. So lots of things are happening where people try to simplify the brain models. In Human Brain Project, they want to go bottom up. They want to really classify all kinds of neurons and every process is in the details. And do simulations, but we don't get any deeper understanding of how the system is working by going bottom up. It's very difficult. So what do we do basically to understand what brains are doing? One idea is that, well, you need an atlas of the brain, which will do the parcellation. The first was done by Brodmann at the beginning of 20th century. But now we have many atlases where people divide brains into patches, and also the deeper structures are included. And you may have, let's say, 100 or 200 or almost 300 patches like that. And then you want to see the information flow or the correlation between signals from different patches. So you take the pairs of patches, green and red, and you look at the correlation of the signal. And well, you can look at the correlation of MEG, EEG, but mostly people look at the correlation of the BOLD, which is kind of a metabolic processes signal, the blood oxygen level dependent. This is what fMRI is measuring. Once we have the correlation matrix, we can try to simplify that by looking at a threshold and saying, most of this is noise. We just look at the strong correlation and we see that there are some patches which really exchange information quite a lot, which probably is this local network. And then we can simplify that into the whole brain graph. And then we can use the graph theory trying to analyze that. So that's the functional road. The structural connectivity road is based on tensor diffusion, where people just look at where are the physical connections. And physical connections doesn't mean that, they are the most important, because you can find that sometimes this functional networks will just go around and make connections through several synapses, not really directly. So let me say a few words about the simulations, which is something that I started from some years ago. And there are many large-scale simulators which try to implement neural networks which are biologically motivated. That means that they have certain properties for their artificial neurons, which makes them more biologically plausible. And there are very detailed simulations, like Genesis Simulator allows you to do quite detailed models with compartmental neurons with lots of connections, etc. And they're very much simplified, which are like point neurons, but at least they should have three kinds of channels. That is excitatory, inhibitory, and the leak channels, which will contribute to spontaneous depolarization. So people have been creating all kinds of models like, okay, let's study reading. Reading means that we change the orthographic representation, the graphemes. into phonemes, which can be pronounced. And so we have this layer which is just phonemes. We have this layers which is just letters, and we throw a string on this layer, and the string is just, well, processed through intermediate layers and is activating this semantic layer. And this semantic layer, in case of this particular model, has 140 different neurons. Each of them represents a micro feature. So if I have a certain word, it may be described by correlation of this word or by the properties of this word, which are actually these micro features, right? So in reality, in the brain, the micro features are really subnetworks, not just single neurons, or maybe at least columns of neurons. But let's say this is a simplification, and each of these highly activated nodes means that there is a certain feature present. So I would like to see what happens when the system is trained and can recognize many words, can have, like, many stories that you run through the system. And then you look at the transitions and the dynamics. So when you show it a word, it comes to a certain, pattern, which is representing the semantics by having these micro features on. So I show it a word, and I see that there are several steps. So the blue here is the beginning of the trajectory. And so this is time, basically, what you see here. And I start from this point and have a few steps, and then the system falls into a kind of, basins of attractors where it just fluctuates around certain pattern. But after a while, it jumps out and it moves to another and another. And so it finally goes around and ends up in this red patch here. So we look at the ways of how to analyze the trajectories and look at the trajectories and look at the properties of these basins of attractors. That is something that we would like to understand. Why there is a transition? Well, because there is a noise in the system, but also because of these leak channels, because neurons depolarize in a spontaneous way. And so they don't want to be highly excited for a long time. So usually you have the alpha, which is just about 10 hertz, let's say, oscillations, spikes per second. But when you really use a particular part of the brain for heavy thinking, you see that it goes to 40 or even much higher number of spikes per second, right? But it doesn't go for a long time. At any given moment, you have like 1% of your neurons really spiking very quickly. And then this 1% goes out and another goes in. So let's say I show it words like flag, and I see, okay, from flag, it just makes few steps and stays within this basin. So this is now the recurrent plots, which are quite useful to see how the trajectory is changing. So I have 140 dimensional vector, right, which describes the pattern. And the time is flowing, and I see that this vector is just fluctuating. So it's all very deep blue, which means it's just changing a bit step by step, and I am in the basin of attractors. But after a while, I see this is, decorrelated or desynchronized, and this patterns is replaced by another pattern, which shares with the previous pattern few things, few nodes, which have been not that strongly activated maybe, but they now recruit others and synchronize. So step by step, I see the system is going from one attractor to the other. And sometimes there is more complex attractors. So rope has kind of two different things in it. And then it comes back to similar, like in this step. So after a while, it comes close to this rope basin of attractor, etc. We would like to understand the process of transitions, and I've done quite a few things with this, and I will just show you very little because we have no time. So the long trajectories that you have here sometimes show you that the system has a tendency to come back to similar states. And so you can also make all kinds of different representations and plots using, all kinds of visualization. We have invented something which I call the fuzzy symbolic dynamics visualization for this kind of plots, or you can just use t-SNE or other kind of visualization like UMAP, which is quite fashionable. And you see that the system starts here, goes into this attractor, goes into this, and you know, just moves around from SOT to SOT. You can say, okay. So we have a toolbox that actually has been developed by Krzysztof Dobosz that allows us to do kind of well, following trajectories and visualizing them. So,
may I interrupt?
Yeah, please.
Could you go back to one of the slides? Oh, for example, this one. How can one interpret those squares on the left-hand side plots? Because it's clearly, they're clearly visible in all of those records.
Yes, exactly. This is the pattern, right? The system falls into this kind of a pattern and then fluctuates. I could show you that live actually running the simulator. You'll see that some of these units are you know, getting slightly higher activation and then lower activation. So step by step, this is just the similarity of what is the current trajectory and what was the trajectory a few steps back here, right? And it's just symmetric. So when I'm here, that means that this point at the trajectory is quite similar to all the points that has happened before. That's the distance or the similarity. This similarity is here, right? So this is a low distance, and the red here means it's a high distance. So it just jumped into different patterns, which is quite different from this one that is here. These recurrent plots are very useful for analysis of nonlinear dynamical systems. And well, there are lots of papers, and actually there will be, in September, there will be a world conference in Lublin on these recurrence plots, actually. Okay, so actually also there is this recurrent quantification analysis, which allows us to draw all kinds of features like the dwell time, how long the system stays in these basins of attractors, what's the average state, how frequently it comes back to similar states, lots of parameters which are nonlinear parameters, which happen to be very useful in classification of different states, also EEG states. So this is actually something that we work on, and I'll show you that in a moment. So we have all this visualization that we want to do, and I want to show you what kind of inspirations you can get from that, okay? So this just shows that the trajectory changes, and what I plot here is just, there are 3 reference points, which are actually the centers for Gaussian functions. You see some parameters of Gaussian functions here, okay? And I have 140 dimensional trajectory, right? So in this case, I just look at how strongly this trajectory is activating these 3 Gaussian functions. If it's close to the center, then obviously it's high on one of the dimensions. Well, and it just goes around in the whole space. But when you use the symbolic dynamics approach, you just have boxes, and you say, okay, is it in A box, B box, C box, etc. But obviously we have 140 dimensions, so we cannot have boxes, because even if we divide each dimension into 2, we'll have 2 to the 140, which will be infinite number, almost infinite number of boxes, right? So we just look at the distance from 3 reference points and see that, well, the system stays fluctuating in this state, in the other states, etc. But then I change the parameters of the system. The only parameter I've changed here is this leak channel. So that means that neurons will not release enough ions to depolarize in a usual way. And because of that, they stay for a longer time synchronized. And there is no attention shift because the synchronization is strong and longer. As a result, you have several states here, and the system, when it's in this state, will actually be able to synchronize across the whole brain somehow, because this state is going to be recognized as metastable state. And so other parts of the brain may say, okay, this is something important, and it stays for a long time because there are many points within the basins of attractors. And so there is a chance to synchronize other groups of neurons with this state, right? Unfortunately, if you close the leak channels, so you just change these parameters, take half of this, then, well, there will be few internal states, and the system will not learn because it will just have a very poor stimulation. So it's like having a baby that grows up in a very poor environment, and there is no stimulation in there. So there is no internal states which can actually form these long-term connections through this flexible hub. And because of that, some more complex functions like social relations are not developing. And so this is the case of autism, and you can try to simulate how strongly this influences the attention shifts, which is one of the things that people measure in case of autism. But if you open this channel slightly more, then you find that then you have a very well, weak, let's say, channels which are not really concentrated in one place, but are kind of very dispersed, wide. So it's very interesting trying to characterize these basins of attractors and see what really happens. And in this case, because there are so many states, but they're short-lived, learning also is impaired. And this is a case where a system jumps from one state to the other all the time without spending any time to really learn something. And this is a case which you can, well, compare to ADHD. And now you can understand why in case of ADHD, you need drugs that will excite the system. And the Realtin, for example, is a kind of a drug which is prescribed to people with ADHD, which is surprising because you see that they are very restless and they cannot, stop moving, etc. And you give them a drug which will excite their brain networks. But by exciting the brain networks, it actually makes the synchronization stronger. Okay, I don't think many people understand that really. And there are many other simulations you can try to use. For example, you can say, okay, if I have this autistic case and I have a very strong synchronization, and the system doesn't want to shift from one to the other, so it stays for a long time, what will happen when I throw at the system a lot of stimuli that change all the time? And you see that the fast presentation of stimuli makes the dynamics much more complex, more internal states which arise. And it's interesting that one of the successful methods of teaching autistic children is called this ABBA, the behavioral stimulation, which requires a series of tasks without any break somehow, so the child goes from one to the other. I actually am involved in one of these, but we haven't made any experiments yet. So I think we can really draw lots of conclusions from that. Okay, this was simulation. I want to show you
I'm very sorry.
real data.
We are running out of time a bit, so.
Okay.
So it's so interesting that that's why I didn't want to interrupt you, but just to remind you.
So I'm wondering what can we do, because okay, I just covered the simulated networks, and I will just tell you what I wanted to say. I wanted to say about our research on really understanding real brains and brain fingerprinting, trying to find out what happens in the real brain. There are many approaches to this, how we can analyze microstates in EEG and relate that to the sources, how we actually use this recurrent analysis or plots on a real EEG, which shows us in the real brain, this real basins of attractors. And then we use spectral analysis and spectral fingerprints and we use the localization and try to improve reconstruction of the signals, and well, also use a lot of fMRI that I want to talk about, and how fMRI is used to provide biomarkers for neuroimaging, and how people try to do with EEG similar things as they do with fMRI, and how we are actually using that, and what kind of experiments we've done to show what happens, and how we try to understand what happens in the brain when the brain is making decisions, which is the decision net. And finally, that we have this new well, experimental possibilities like EEG with the combination of direct current stimulation, which we haven't tried yet because of the COVID, unfortunately. So just to finish, I want to tell you that the group of students that I'm kind of involved with has won a kind of a hackathon, which was organized by the GTEC company in Austria. That's one of the companies that produces all kinds of very nice equipment for brain observation. And they got the first place for NeuroBeat BCI application. And now they are organizing the Neuro Hackathon, which will be on the 21st of May. So they are looking for the groups that can participate in that. And usually these hackathons are just, you know, you get a problem, or you state a problem and you have to solve it in a few days, programming and using this EEG equipment. So we've published a lot of things, and just to conclude, well, flexible AI should be based on brain principles. And so we need to understand the brain, and this is our great challenge, time to do something good with this. And this will draw inspiration from brain science, and neurodynamics seems to be the key to understand mental states. And although we still don't understand many things, these neurocognitive technologies are coming in the diagnosis and repair. So the biggest thing that we can achieve here is to do similar things that people are able to do with fMRI. And the potential here, potential applications, but also, you know, understanding of what brains are doing are enormous. We've done some work with people from Lenski Institute and from the Institute of Neuroimaging in Cayetane, the Physiology and Pathology of Hearing, within the big Symphonia project, which is just going to end this year. And as usually, I put all the slides on the web page, so you can just, you know, Google my name and look at the lectures and see the slides for yourself. And well, we have some money for unfortunately, this money that we get in this as a research university is for experienced researchers from abroad. Now, in this area, it's very hard to find people. I'm not successful at all. I'm trying to find people in China and in other places, but it's very hard to find. But there are really many good topics to work on. So that's about it.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a really pity that we don't have more time, but I know that some people have some other duties, and unfortunately some of them already left us or left us already, but they told me that they will listen to the lecture with pleasure, recorded lecture. Okay, maybe I will stop recording.